The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working in Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in this week. Great to have you. This show has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a culture and leadership activated by meaning and purpose. Our mission is to help our clients create a destination workplace where people flock to join, are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, can grow into their fuller potential, and are committed to stay and dynamically deliver on the company's mission, which translates to higher profits. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. With us today is Andrew C.M. Cooper, an internationally recognized executive leader and champion for compassionate business practices. He led as a history-making first millennial and Black executive to serve as general counsel at UPS Airlines, the world's largest logistics airline with over 20,000 employees operating in 220 countries. Cooper's team was essential to the success of Operation Warp Speed, the United States pandemic vaccine relief effort. He helps organizations regain and retain high performance through leadership transformation. He's the author of The Ethical Imperative, Leading with Conscience to Shape the Future of Business. Today, he joins us from Menlo Park, California, where he's working. His home is in Atlanta. Andy, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Hi, Dr. Cortez. Thanks for having me.
So welcome. And please just call me Elise. And look at this beautiful book. Let's celebrate this. We were talking about this before you came on. Look what you brought into the world. Look at this.
Oh, it's crazy to think.
I know. And I do want you to know something else really, really precious. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
What you did here is actually harder than bringing a child into the world. It is.
Well, I will take it on your authority on that.
Yes, I am qualified to speak on that front. Done both. So I'm really there's so many things I want to celebrate about your book, Andy, and we are aligned ideologically, really, in so many ways. I couldn't find any way that I wasn't aligned with you. Put it that way.
Wow.
I do want to start by situating just kind of why you wrote the book. You said you have two objectives for the book. So for our listeners and viewers who haven't yet read the book, let's start with that.
Yes. I've really had two objectives as I was writing the book. The first objective was to encourage this a new generation of leaders that are coming into the world to see business as a transformative force, a positive way to change the world, not this immovable progress. And secondly, to influence business leaders that are currently working in large and complex organizations to think more consciously about in local communities and society.
So Andy, we got a little bit of technology issue here. I don't know if you can get closer to, you're probably on a laptop. My guess is you're in a hotel because you're on the road, but we're having trouble with connectivity. Can you maybe get a little closer to your laptop?
Yes. How about this?
That's better. Would you start over with that answer? Because I know it was good and I got some. So yeah, answer the question again, why it is the two objectives for why writing the book, so we can get the real answer.
Yes. So I wrote this book for two reasons. The first is to convince this generation of emerging leaders that are entering into large and complex organizations. I want them to see business as a transformative force for positive change, rather than this, a movable obstruction to progress. And secondly, to influence business leaders that are currently in these large organizations and have been for a while to think more conscientiously about the role of corporations in local communities and broader society.
So I got most of that, but that's probably because my listeners and viewers haven't read the book, but I have. Can you maybe try to refresh your page, Andrew, to try to reconnect the connection?
Sure. Okay, I've refreshed my connection. Is that better for you?
It sounds a whole lot better. Let's see if it sticks.
Okay, let's pray we can do. Should I answer the question again?
No, let me just try to summarize. So what I really understand here is one, you identify yourself as a millennial. So I know one of the things you're trying to do is to influence the new generations to view business as a transformative force for positive change rather than an immovable obstruction to progress. I know there's some of the younger generations have a resistance to capitalism and maybe are moving more towards socialism because of that. And
Yeah.
secondly, you do want to influence business leaders to think conscientiously about a corporation's role in local communities and in the broader society. So I think those are just so two amazing reasons to write a book, Andy.
Well, thank you.
And if
Can
you want
you?
to comment on that.
Yeah. So is the connection better now?
Yeah, you sound a heck of a lot better. I got you now. Before I was getting little bits and pieces of you, and that just wasn't enough.
Okay,
Um,
I'm sorry. I am in a hotel, but you would think in Silicon Valley the technology, the internet would be great here, but
one
I guess we're
one
having trouble.
would, yeah, one would think. However, it's it's not perfect.
Well, to
Um,
your point, there have been a number of studies that have come out since, oh my gosh, since the mid 2000s, that really show these two focuses are really needed to be addressed in today in writing and through leadership. There was a Harvard Business Review article in 2020 that talked about how millennials and need are looking for businesses to prioritize social impact because they care about social impact, and that really is a sea change in the way that businesses have approached the marketplace and local communities, and it's something that we should focus on in the future.
Okay, so I might as well come clean now with you then as to how I align with you ideologically and philosophically. Among other things, I am a conscious capitalist. And I'm on the board here in Dallas of Conscious Capitalism, which of course means that the four tenets are that organizations subscribe to doing business with a higher purpose in mind. They
Yes.
do it with conscious leadership, conscious culture, and a stakeholder orientation, not a shareholder orientation, a stakeholder orientation. All that aligns with your book. And of course, my work specifically, Andy, is helping organizations to create cultures that are activated in meeting purpose, again, because the majority of the workforce is going to be Gen X and Gen Y,
Hmm.
or excuse me, Gen Y and Gen Z in about 5 to 7 years. And so we need to create those kind of environments. So I'm completely aligned with you.
Yes. Yeah. It's something that we are seeing. It's a phenomenon we're seeing both in the at the firm level, but also in our society at large. So if you look at the voting population, if you look at those who are in childbearing ages now and are influencing their local communities, all of the demographic changes are beginning to hit at the same time, and so it's ripe for businesses. It's a right time for businesses to think about what does Gen Z look for, what do millennials look for, and what do the future generations look for. My daughter, who's an alpha, she's already being raised with certain beliefs and thoughts, and she's raised in a. If you go to any playground in America, you will see it has completely changed in the last 50 years. And so, yeah, this is the world we find ourselves in.
I'm okay with that. I'm very happy to help usher that in and champion it just alongside you. I'm coming over, so look out. All right, so I do want to situate you. You situated something really interesting in your book that I had never really heard before in terms of a concept, and that's this idea of a conventional meta. Can you situate that for us, please?
Yeah, so the META is an acronym initially used by military tactitioners, which stands for Most Effective Tactics Available. I happen to be a gamer, and it was adopted by gamers to refer to using the best tools available in a certain circumstance. Now, the interesting thing about META is that most developers, game developers, try to avoid the creation of a meta because it tends to create a stale game. If you know exactly what you need to use in every circumstance, well, the game becomes stale and stagnant. In the context that I import the term for business, it is to create a distinction between those executives who are looking to use the best tactics available in an updated game or as circumstances change over time, versus those who want to slavishly kind of hold themselves to the conventions of old. And I try to position it as those executives, those traditionalists that hold to a conventional meta in this new environment we find ourselves in will surely fail. Those are the organizations that will no longer be at the forefront tomorrow. There used to be this concept of too big to fail, and now we are starting to see that nothing is too big to fail in this market. And so the encouragement for executives, emerging leaders, is to always adjust your meta in this new environment.
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and grab that. One of the things I certainly admire is your acronym for traditional to describe the more traditionalist executive, and I think that bears talking about before we get into really your situation of conscientious executive. So you break it down to traditional. So I'll say what this is, so you don't have to do it yourself. But that breaks over to leaders that are traditionally more use timidity, resistance, arrogance, dogmatism, inflexibility, tunnel vision, intolerance, out-modeled conduct, narrow-mindedness, authoritarian tendencies, and loophole-seeking behaviors. So that's how you talk to. That's the contrast of the kind of leader that you are trying to move away from. Help us move away from that kind of leadership style.
Yes, that's true. So I wish I could take complete credit for these these characteristics of a traditional leader, but Megan Cashley has a great article in the Harvard Business Review, and I would just encourage folks to read her take on it. But we have all had bosses that have these types of characteristics, and they tend to align with folks who are comfortable in a way of doing things and in a way of operating. And as opposed to those traditionalist executives stands this concept that I've created called the conscientious executive. The conscientious executive is really the antidote to each one of these characteristics, and they are the type of person who looks at compassion and who is not resistant to change and who is humble in the way that they are coaching and being coached in reverse mentorship relationships. So there are all these different characteristics that I talk about in the book of the conscientious executive, and the hope is that we can create an archetypal antidote to what we see in the office today. And I would even go one half step back and say this hasn't always been the case. We haven't always seen executives in large and small organizations that had these characteristics. In fact, if you go back to the 1920s, if you look at the 50-year period between 1920 and 1950, what you find is that cohort, the greatest and the silent, they tended to really model conscientious leadership in the way that I described, because that generation went through defining events as well, such as World War One, the aftermath of World War One, the beginnings of World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, and so those executives, at least the beginnings of the Civil Rights Movement, those executives saw great generational change, and as a result, they were on record of making statements and policies in their organizations that tended to look after the good of people. I think about executives during that time, and you contrast that with executives in the 90s, for example, and what you find is a very different approach to doing business.
Yeah, so one of the things that I definitely wanted to comment on that front, I had just a couple of weeks ago I had Hunter Hastings on my program. He is an economist, and he wrote a book called Aberrant Capitalism. I think the rise and return of customer capitalism, something like that. What was great about that, Andy, and it really kind of aligns with what you're talking about, is what I really took away, so many things I took away from it. But what he did was he really helped describe the evolution of capitalism over the last 240 years. And you described how when it first was introduced, it was focused on creating value for the consumer and bettering their lives. And it, uber focused on that. And yes, it did change after the World War II, because what happened is, as he narrates it, is that we then looked to business to be able to help serve the people, right? So it became kind of a war economy. So it was that business, that social focused. But then we got into, as he calls it, fiscalization and bureaucratization, which really began to, really bloat organizations. And then we got heavy into that whole shareholder value thing in the like 80s, right?
Oh my gosh, you're so right.
Right. And so it really, really opened my eyes. But then what he speaks to is, he says he thinks about 15% of the organizations today are really run as a consumer capitalism front. And that's really more of the answer. And I see that too when you talk about, today's executives are focused more on profit than value. That's what he's also speaking to. So we're return to, let's create value and not focus on profit. That will come naturally if we create the value.
No, that's fascinating. And I'll just give one anecdote to kind of support that thinking. So if you look at David Packard at HP, or Thomas Watson at IBM, or Herbert Dow at Dow Chemical, these pre-1970 CEOs, they would say things like, and this is coming from Herbert Dow. He said that the most effective way of working is to care for our employees and see that they are happy and contented.
Yeah.
But then when you look at 1990s era CEOs, if you think about a guy like Albert Dunlap, we all heard about Dunlap at Sunbeam. He was famous for tearing companies apart. He went on record saying employees don't matter. The only thing that matters is shareholder value. That's a quote from a CEO, and there was a major shift. And I think what we're seeing today is, in the post-2020 era, the post-COVID era, there is a similar consensus among employees when it comes to the type of leadership that is most effective for them. And that is the CEO or the leader that asks or that answers the question, do you care about me? In the same way that the World War I and World War II CEOs were saying things like, we want to care about the employees because everyone was going through the same thing everywhere during the war. The same is true, post 2020, where everyone was going through the pandemic everywhere at the same time. And as a result, everyone sort of came out of that with similar questions. And that really is where the focus on people has become elevated.
Mm. I knew we were going to have a great conversation. All right, let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Andrew C.M. Cooper, an internationally recognized executive leader and champion for compassionate business practices. We've been talking a bit about where his book came from and how he's really trying to be able to help more younger generations embrace capitalism as it is, and to then encourage business leaders to do business in a way that really benefits their full communities. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. Like Andy, I too am dedicated to helping create a world where people are actually enjoying their work and feeling good about what they're doing. So I continue to research and write my own books. My last one came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And perhaps like Andy, I wrote it to help business leaders better understand the lay of the workforce land today. What do they want and need from their work? And then I offer 22 best practices to help fold into your culture to provide that for them. You can find more about it at my website, elisecortez.com, or on Amazon. If you are just joining us, my guest is Andrew C.M. Cooper. He's the author of The Ethical Imperative, Leading with Conscience to Shape the Future of Business. So one of the other many things that I found that I could relate to and embrace and champion along with you is this idea of compassion. What a concept. And I really appreciated that you went on, the way that you went on to define it, Andy, is you talk about it's a critical part of, investment in human capital. And the way that you defined it is compassion is a deep understanding of other suffering and a desire to help. It is expressed through acts of generosity, empathy, and support. And it is rooted in our shared humanity. Yes, please, may I have another? That sounds real good to me. Could we do more of that?
as we should, and I'll tell you, the compassion key really became important to me during COVID, as we were dealing with information coming from lots of sources. People had different opinions about the pandemic, and that was not just on the leadership team, that was even among the rank and file. And then something interesting happened. There were individuals within my vertical, my structure, that began losing family members. They began, and the conversation started to shift from, whether or not the information we were receiving was accurate, to how do we support and help and show compassion for the people who are going through enormous amounts of loss. As you mentioned in the intro, this was a 20,000 person organization. And so, that pivot was critical to reduce churn, to ensure that we were effective at delivering on a critical mission for the nation, and generally to just ensure the well-being and productivity of the folks that were on the team. So, there were a few sources of truth that were instructive for me. One was Harvard and the research that was coming out at the time about compassion, and how compassion can ensure that you keep employee retention high, that overall engagement and productivity in the workplace is high, and compassion is very simple to do. It costs nothing for us. So, for example, during the time that we began getting reports of some of our team losing family, I was overseas, and compassion for me was ending my international trip, coming back to the States, ensuring that those employees had unlimited time off to take care of their family, and ensuring that there were coverage there for them, even if that meant I had to roll up my sleeves and be involved in doing some of the hard work, as every leader should do. So, I mean, sometimes it's just sweat equity that we invest in our people to ensure that they know that they are not alone through challenges.
Well, and to that end, Andy, one of the other many things I appreciated about your book is you shared in there, relative to this subject, how you at one point your boss said, "Get everybody back in the office," and you had people who had if they got exposed, they had severe immunity problems.
Right.
And other people that I think somebody had been in maybe perhaps in an automobile accident and
Yep.
it was hard to get around, etc. And so walking that fine line between this is the mandate, you get your people back in the office, and having the compassion for your people that says, hang on, I know my people, I know what they're dealing with. And if I do that to them, that one, it's not compassionate. And two, what are the ramifications of that requirement?
No, that you're spot on. And the way I navigated that politically was going back to our core values. As an organization, UPS is one that believes in safety. It elevates safety above all else. And so making the case that allowing our workers to have the flexibility to work remotely, and I was one of the first vice presidents to do so, was merely connecting all of the various data points that we had available to us to the core value of safety, and into saying, hey, if we want to walk consistent with that approach, then we have to do the compassionate thing here. And that ultimately prevailed, won the day, particularly when our CEO made a decision that aligned with that point of view.
Well, I really want to celebrate that. That's fantastic. A lot of organizations are still really struggling with that whole idea. Okay, so now let's really celebrate compassion. It really can pay dividends. I loved the story that you told about gravity pay. So let's share that with our listeners and viewers. This is kind of, way out there when it comes to talk about a business case, but can you share that story with us?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Dan Price at Gravity Payments, there's a small, well, at the time, there were a small company out in Seattle, Washington, back in 2015. Dan is in the business of payment processing. So, I also run a small micro market, business, and we use payment processors. And his business was one of those. And in 2015, he's walking around his office and he finds a fast food training manual on the desk of one of his employees. And, when he inquired about it, what he found was that this particular employee had to work a second full-time job in order to make ends meet while there. And that just didn't sit well with him. So what he decided to do, he took a lot of flack for. He decided to raise the minimum payment each year, yearly payment to all of his employees, their salary, to $70,000. He lowered his own salary from seven figures, which was a 800% pay cut, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And he was branded a socialist by all these different, capitalists and so on. And what ultimately happened, despite all the prognostications that his business would fail, is that 70% of his employees, the turnover rate dropped. It's by 70%. More employees were covered by health insurance because they were able to either go out into the market or be covered by the company's offering. There were 10 times more babies born and 10 times more homes purchased during the time shortly after he raised the salary to $70,000. There were 70% of debt paid down by employees that were in his organization shortly thereafter. I think they looked back. So Harvard actually used this as a case study and went to look back at how these employees were doing. And there was a 5-year look back after the implementation of the salary. And what they found is the debt ratios on his employees dropped by 70%. So the bottom line is that there were a bunch of metrics that were evaluated by very successful researchers at Harvard, and the conclusion was doing this, looking out for his employees, ensuring that they had livable wages, ensuring that they were compensated well, was not only good for them individually, but good for their families, good for local communities. And I think the conclusion truly is it's good for society. I spent a bit of time in the book talking about poverty and how poverty becomes entrenched in communities, and it creates a vicious cycle within communities that destabilizes the market and creates economic conditions that make it hard for businesses to thrive, not just the people who live in those communities, but it makes it harder for us as conscious capitalists to make money. And so Dan Price is a great example of the type of leader that we should be looking for. Boards, I encourage boards and share owners to do as their part to encourage leaders like Dan Price to be elevated.
I love all of that. And I also want to echo for those people that are like, I'm still not seeing the bottom line results here. The other thing that I just want to situate that I took from your book, that in terms of the business results of that move here, is you say that the company's customer base doubled.
Oh, yes.
And they increased their payment processing from 3.8 billion to 10.2 billion dollars a year.
Yes.
So, there's, the financial turnaround here. So win on all fronts, back on that whole stakeholder orientation, win on all fronts. I just want to make sure that we celebrate. I've had Dr. Raj Sisodia on my program a couple of times. He's the co-founder of Conscious Capitalism. He's done a ton of research that shows organizations that embrace these kinds of principles oftentimes outperform their peers financially in the S&P. This isn't just soft stuff. It really is good for everybody. So I just want to echo that.
Oh, I'm so glad that you pointed that out, because that is the bottom line for us that are in big business, right? We want to ensure that we're making money, and look, it's a win-win. It's a win for the company. It's a win for our employees, and I even go so far as to say it's a win-win-win. It's a win for the local communities as well. So to your point, the increase in their payment processing, that is no small increase. I mean, it was almost threefold. And what I think ends up happening is that the story of the impact on people inures to the benefit of the organization, because people want to get behind positive and good stories. And so it creates that virtuous cycle, because if you are living in a community and there's a company doing good, you want to support that company doing good, and it bears out in the metrics.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so let's take our last break, because after the break, I really want to talk more about this hierarchy of inspirational needs that you situated so beautifully. That really aligns with my world. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Andrew C. M. Cooper. He's an internationally recognized executive leader and champion for compassionate business practices. We've been talking a bit about the business case for doing these sorts of things. After the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about how these things translate to the actual, when they're put in place, into the actual performance and engagement of the people that are powering the organization. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us, and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break about my last book coming out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. What I did for you is I created a 3-page assessment for you to be able to pull off my website. It's free. It's at gusto-now.com. And that will help you understand the extent to which your current culture is really suiting what today's discerning workforce really wants. It will help you on your culture and organizational development. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Andrew C. M. Cooper. He's the author of The Ethical Imperative: Leading with Conscience to Shape the Future of Business. So for this last segment here, Andy, I really wanted to focus on this notion of how we can elevate the actual experience of work. I mentioned in the introduction that I'm out to create destination workplaces within organizations. And I was very intrigued, and I want to thank you tremendously, because you have contributed squarely, directly into my world in a way that I hadn't discovered on my own. So you talk about this idea of the hierarchy of inspirational needs. My mentor and coach is Dr. Lance Secretan. And he is known for inspirational leadership. And I do know that Bain Consulting is informed by his work. You mentioned Eric Garten and Michael Mankins, I guess it is, partners at Bain & Company, and they wrote this instructive article in the Harvard Business Review that uses this index to pay mathematically the baseline level employee productivity and satisfaction using 3 different levels: satisfaction, engagement, and inspiration. And I thought that was fascinating. So can you kind of I want to just talk about the measures that you came up with, or they came up with, and then I also want to situate kind of what that looks like in each of those 3 categories.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gartner and Minkin, they surveyed over 300 executives worldwide who assessed productivity, and they looked at productivity based on dissatisfaction, satisfaction, and engagement. And inspiration. So you've got really 4 metrics. So I talk about the 3 in the book: the satisfaction, engagement, and inspiration, but they also looked at dissatisfaction as well. And what they found was that there were truly noteworthy productivity scores for those employees who were inspired. They were, as we say in economics, statistically significant. So there was at least 1 or 2 standard deviations from the mean in productivity. So what does that mean? That means, so at a satisfaction level, at the basic satisfaction, when an employee is satisfied, it means that they have the necessary tools to do their job, and they do it. And it manifests itself as employees showing up for work and using the tools that you give them. And it's just like showing up for practice and on game day in a game, at the next level, that's where there's...
And that measure, by the way, is 100, right? So
it's 100. That's right.
The mathematics, it'll really help people understand the distinction here.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So satisfied employees are productive at a baseline level of 100, right? Then at the next level, you've got engaged employees. And these engagement is akin to thinking about winning the game and attempting to do so, actually putting in some effort. So you've got all the elements of satisfaction. They show up, they use the tools, but then they're also thinking about, how do I win this game? And I'm actually going to put in effort to win the game along with my peers. They focus on how to best use the tools that you've provided them to achieve better than expected results. And so if satisfied employees are satisfied at a baseline of 100, engaged employees are productive at a level of 144. Now, inspired employees, these are employees who are productive at just really astounding rates, 2 standard deviations from the mean. These are teams that become consumed with a task. They understand its importance. They look like a team that is laser focused on winning a championship. And when you look at the numbers, when Minkin and Gartner looked at the numbers, productivity level for these employees were 225, which is, 225% more than the standard, than satisfied employees. It was incredible results. And what it really shows us is that employees who are inspired by the work will actually produce more than you ask them, and more than you could even imagine. And I can tell you just anecdotally that actually happens. So during the COVID pandemic, when we began working on Operation Warp Speed, and our employees understood that the work we were engaged in was important to the world, when the Trump administration asked the Civil Reserve Air Fleet or big integrators like UPS and FedEx and DHL to help to do things that the government could not do alone, our employees really understood their importance in the overall effort. And what we saw was an inspired team that did far more than we anticipated, and within several months had delivered over 1 billion vaccines and therapeutics to needed patients around the world.
Talk about doing something with your one precious life. So Zach Mercurio is a friend and a colleague, and he's been on the program, and he really focuses on this idea of mattering. And, so when people understand they matter, and they know how their actions are aligned with the organizational purpose, and they see what their role is, how they're connected, that is like almost unstoppable. It's just so beautiful to see that. And think about that happy person then goes home to their family and positively infects and brings that beautiful energy into their home life. and then they go back into their communities and they bring it there as well. And that's the next place I wanted to go to with you, Andy, that I thought was really beautiful about your book. Your first opening chapter about the burning house is really incredible. But I really appreciate that you talk about how the conscientious leader values the invisible and often overlooked aspects of communities, and that they can reach in there and do something with these distressed areas. So could you speak a little bit about just why is that perspective so important to you, and how do you see leaders really championing that?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a single wide trailer on a dirt road in rural South Carolina. Neither of my parents went to college, and it was a student in the schools that my mother integrated. So I look at the opportunities that I've had in life with a humbled lens, a grateful lens, because the metrics suggest that I should not have been able to accomplish even half of what prayerfully I've been able to, and largely was a result of having someone take a chance on me. And that person was my mentor, Denisa Folmar, who was a in-house lawyer at the Coca-Cola company. And Coca-Cola invested in my education, invested in my professional development and career, and I could not be more grateful. And we see that story play out with organizations all around the world. Coca-Cola invests in Atlanta, so does Chick-fil-A in some of the most underserved neighborhoods. If you think about Bentonville, Arkansas, and how Walmart has turned that town around, Hershey, Pennsylvania. I could go on and on with these what used to be company towns that were not on the map, and they were put on the map because there was someone in a company that said, you know what, we want to invest in this place. My belief is that when organizations, and I think it bears out in the metrics as well, that when organizations decide that they are going to lean in and invest in ways that they otherwise don't, there are dramatic things that take place. In Louisville, Kentucky, when I was there at the airline, the airline engaged in a program called the Metro College Program, which provides 100% college tuition for employees for the airline. And most of them were students at University of Louisville. And many of those students have family in Appalachia or in rural Kentucky and would not have the resources to be able to get a college education. And so it means so much to me personally, and has to my family. And you will see the folks that listen, that read the book, I start off talking about my cousin Wilhelmina Nesbitt, who did not have the benefit of the resources that I did, and we had two very different outcomes. And so I am a believer in the good that capitalism can do. I'm a believer in the good that companies can do, if only they will, and if only they have the right leaders.
Mm-hmm. And if only they learn, right? Which is why I appreciate what you're doing. And I mean, I'm very proud of the work that I get to do as well. And it's incredibly fulfilling and an incredible honor to walk that journey with leaders and help elevate their consciousness, elevate what they can see doing with and through all of their stakeholders. So I really appreciate that. And to that end, I can't let you go without addressing what you also put toward the end of your book. You said that there are three non-traditional archetypes of professional relationships that are essential to career growth for their conscientious leader and are not routinely discussed. Yeah. Would you share those with us? I thought it was incredibly compelling. I had never heard of this before either, by the way, Andy.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So we've all heard of the mentor, the sponsor, and the board of directors. These are groups of people that will help you through your journey. But I think there are some other archetypes that are really important. The first is the shifter, and that person, unlike the mentor who will give you a strategy about how to go about your career, the shifter is really your tactician. They're the person who gives you the eventualities, and when something negative happens, they say, well, we've talked about this, now let's shift gears, let's move to plan B. That person for me has been Dr. James Stevenson, a former NASA researcher. He also wrote a comment on the back of the book. But this archetype is like your 10th man, your ombudsman, and every single one of us needs someone like that, not just a mentor showing us the way, but also a shifter who is able to pick us up when we fall down, and who's gaming things out on the fly, in real time. The connector is the social butterfly. Unlike the sponsor that is in the room that is able to pull you up on your career journey, the connector is also someone who's walking alongside you, but they may be naturally inclined to connecting very disparate points of view and people to help you see that there might be threads where you least expect them, and so that person plays a vital role in bridging the gaps that you may find in a relationship with a sponsor who is somewhat removed from your day to day and is not really looking to do that type of on the ground connecting. And then there's my personal favorite, the benevolent antagonist. For me, this is an attorney named Nate Smith, who became a CEO of a company out in Australia today, a $1 billion waste management company. But Nate Smith, if you're listening, I love you, brother. He is the benevolent antagonist is someone who is always challenging you, but in good ways. Sometimes we confuse these people with a shark, someone who wishes ill in your career, but they don't. They actually want to sharpen themselves and they want to sharpen you. And so they're going to challenge you actively, challenge you to do more. And it tends to be, as we get higher and higher in organizations, we have less people like this, less people who are willing to challenge us and say, maybe we don't go the Milton Friedman route on this. Maybe we take a different road. Maybe we don't think about profit in this particular equation. Maybe there are some intangibles that we should be thinking about. But the benevolent antagonist truly is someone who has your best interest at heart, and they drive constructively improvement in an executive. And so some people may be thinking, well, why are we talking about this in the context of conscientious leadership? It's because the latter part of my book, the last 5 chapters or so, are what I call the moves that matter. And they are geared for executives and leaders and even emerging leaders who may not be at the C-level yet, but to give them the steps that are relevant for them to become more conscientious in their work.
And it's beautifully written, by the way. We talked about what it took to actually bring it into the world, so I'm so glad it made it across the finish line. So we've done it. It happens. It goes by so fast, Andy.
Oh my gosh.
This show is listened to by people around the world, and they really are out. They want to either join organizations like the ones you and I are out to help organizations create. They want to become that better leader, inspirational, conscientious, that we've been discussing here. And they do want to do business that betters the world. What would you like to leave them with?
Well, I want them to know that any thought, any process, and experience that can manifest at an individual level, it may manifest at an organizational level, given the right conditions. And that means that corporations, they can perpetuate acts that are hateful and loving. They can experience stages of life like growth and death. They can be vindictive and generous, innovative and stagnant, sick and healthy, uncaring and conscientious, all the range of things. So all of these are an expression of a composite personality that results from the distinct corporate reputation. And that's driven by the individuals within the organization. So, as my current boss, Jeremiah Chan, says, if we want to move the metrics, all we have to do is do it. And so if you're an executive and you want to be more conscientious, just do it. It doesn't have to go through a committee, and it can go through just the little things that you do every day that you have control over, interactions with your employees, management of your budget. So I hope people leave this conversation with a sense of hope that you can be equipped to make a difference, and that those little differences do matter.
Andrew C.M. Cooper, I'm very, very happy to host you on Working on Purpose. I want to celebrate your passion, your mind, your heart, what you're putting out into the world. I'm right there with you. I'm rowing right with you. So glad to meet you, read your book, to learn from you, to be inspired by you. Thank you for joining Working on Purpose.
Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. Listeners, viewers, you're going to want to learn more about Andy C.M. Cooper and the work that he does helping organizations to regain and retain high performance through leadership transformation, and his book, The Ethical Imperative. So start by visiting his website. It's andrew-cooper.com, andrew-cooper.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. or wherever you get your podcast. We were on air with Dr. Julia Deganji talking about her new book, Energy Rising, the Neuroscience to Leading with Emotional Power. She taught us so much about the need for all of us to not only become more aware of our full range of emotions, but also what to do to heal painful emotions so that we can lead more wholly and make a greater impact. Incredibly powerful conversation. Next week, we'll be on the air with Dr. Marie-Helene Pelletier talking about her book, The Resilience Plan, a strategic approach to optimizing your work performance and mental health. See you then. Remember that work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave, so let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.